So my official topic at CAS-E, which Monica mentioned, actually has to do with oral tradition and divination. So the official title is Written Word in Yazidi Oral Tradition, Bookish Techniques of Prognostication as Sources of Esoteric Knowledge. Basically, it's about how forms of divination act as sources of bookish revelation in Yazidi oral religion, which is a religion which has traditionally survived without written sacred books, but in an environment where books were part of religion generally, and they had to use certain techniques to survive in that milieu. Last year, because I have already talked about this in the second semester, and it would be kind of boring for those who actually study. So I thought I talk about then a different topics outside it. So it still has to do with divination, but it's about the question of how esoteric knowledge could be approached from the aspect of power relations. Actually, partially I was inspired to talk about this, but he's not here by Professor, a conversation I had with this Professor Nairing, where he mentioned that one aspect which we don't seem to study much at CAS-E is the connection between power relations and the esoteric. He was actually thinking more about Muslim-Yazidi relations, where Muslims are the powerful ones and Yazidis are sort of oppressed or powerless. And they use the esoteric, so to speak, to somehow counterbalance these unequal power relations. But actually, I right now want to talk about the same aspect, but within between Yazidis themselves. So I want to talk about how access to esoteric knowledge relate to and reflect the power relations within the Yazidi community, that is within the traditional religious establishment, who use the Weberian term that they possess a kind of routinized charisma. So between the traditional religious establishment and the seers, who possess a kind of actual charisma. And I also want to look at how becoming a seer can provide agency to the powerless or oppressed. So first, a very few quick words about Yazidis, because they are not so well known. So Yazidis are an ethno-religious minority of the Middle East who follow their own religion. I always have to emphasize this because I keep getting the question if they are Christians or Muslims. No, they are not. So Yazidi religion or Yazidis is a religion of its own, it's singular, unique, different from all other religions. And they are Yazidis because they follow this religion. Most Yazidis Kurdish speakers, with a very few exceptions, who speak Arabic as a native language. And we don't know the exact number because there is no census in this region, but it's estimated there are around 500,000, give or take. There used to be Yazidi communities in what is today's East Turkey and Northern Syria. Those are no longer around because those members who survived are living now in the West. There are still communities of a few 10,000 Yazidis in Georgia and Armenia, which fall back to the 19th and early 20th century when they fled there from the Ottoman Empire to evade persecution. There is a huge Western diaspora, primarily in Germany, but most Yazidis actually live in northern Iraq, which is a historical center. The region seems to have developed here. This is where there are most sacred places lie, and this is where the putative religious leaders of the community also live. This is where I did my fieldwork, actually. So who are seers or Kocheks, as they are called by Yazidis? So seers are people who are able to directly communicate with the supernatural, or as they say, with the Batinî word. Now, Batinî is a word of Arabic origin. It literally means hidden, but it's quite often translated into English as esoteric. In this context, among Yazidis, I always feel that translating it as heavenly or spiritual word would be more correct, but maybe at CAS-E it should be esoteric, I'm not sure. Anyway, however we translate it, seers are able to communicate with the Batinî word because they possess kerem or keramet. That's another word of Arabic origin, and it refers to miraculous power of divine origin. And depending on the region, the way this miraculous power is personified is either in the form of a delil, which literally means guide, better translated as spiritual guide, which is an entity originating the heavenly or Batinî world. Or in some regions, it can be in the form of jinn servants. Now, it has to be mentioned that in most of the Middle East, having a jinn servant is a somewhat dubious or negative thing. But here, among those who actually have it, it's more seen like a positive, like a sign of being a special person. So it doesn't have a negative meaning. Personally, I work more with those in the region where they had the spiritual guide. What kind of abilities do Yazidi seers have? These fall into three categories. The first one is looking. That's a translation of the Kurdish word. It basically means when seers consult with their clients who come to them about all kinds of everyday problems like being sick, not being able to conceive children, to get married, fights within the family, business ventures, migration, which is usually illegal, so it's tricky. And in modern regions, it can even be about school problems or love problems. And then the seer communicates with the Batinî word and gives the answer. Now, this is the most frequent. The second category, and this is practiced only by some, or this belongs only to some seers, not all of them, is being able to say history, as I say. So history here refers to the future. This is actually uttering prophetic statements. Usually, typically, these are very apocalyptical about all kind of wars and horrible bloody things happening. That tends to come true in the Middle East. And sometimes it's also about social and cultural developments. For example, seers are supposed to have foretold girls wearing pants. That's right, a recent development, or people flying in iron in the air in airplanes. And finally, the third category is being able to perform miracles like flying in the air or transforming objects. But this seems to belong to the past, so people recall how their parents or grandparents saw such things, but today no seer claims to possess this kind of power. It may be worth saying a few words about how one becomes a seer. So typically, becoming a seer is initiated or heralded by a period of suffering. This is very much like what is described in literature as shamanic sickness. So it's a period when somebody goes through physical, psychological, or psychosomatic suffering. Most often this consists of fainting episodes, fits, epilepsy-like fits. Sometimes people enter catatone states which may last hours or even days. Then there are depressive symptoms like crying, not able to eat. And finally, psychosomatic symptoms like going blind or mute or paralyzed. And this is all a sign that can be a sign that someone is being contacted by the esoteric world and has to become a seer. And once they realize that this is the reason behind their sufferings and they accept their fate, that they are supposed to become seers, then this period of suffering either ends or at least eases. Seers used to play quite an important social and religious role in the past, but by the end of the last century or millennia, so by 2000, they seem to be disappearing. So, for example, Professor Kramer, who started Yazidi studies in the 90s in the West by being the first who actually went and asked Yazidis about their traditions and published it. He wrote in his book in 2005, based on what he was told by Yazidis living in Germany and Iraq, that in the early 2000s, 4 or 5 such seers are still known to function. Formerly, the number was much greater. And when I first went to Iraq to do my field research, that was in 2002 and 2003, a very long time ago. So this was also my impression that seers seem to have disappeared. I was not actually concentrating on them at the time, but still they did not seem to be around. And when I asked, people said that no, there are no more seers. It's a thing of the past, or maybe in some isolated parts where I couldn't even go because that was still under Saddam. So it seemed to be finished. It was only years and years later that I realized that there were still seers around, but they were working in secret, in a hidden way. Later, when people talked about this, I thought about why they disappeared. And of course, there are many different reasons, but the main reason seemed to be the modernization of both Iraqi and Yazidi society and the spread of school education and the emergence of a new middle class. And obviously, this middle class was mostly against such backward superstitious things, and they also impacted other people, less educated people. When I heard about seers who were still working in the 90s, sometimes people said that, we went to them, but they worked in secret because they were afraid of people laughing them and making fun of them. So there was this aspect. The other one was kind of political because seers were persecuted by the state. First, I thought that when they talked about how Saddam persecuted seers, and there are many stories about that, it was because, again, this is something like superstition, and he wanted to modernize society. And even today, Baghdad doesn't have much time for this, but in the Kurdistan region, which is an autonomous region within Iraq, at least Muslims who do this kind of things can get into trouble with state authorities. So it's a reason to sort of go underground. But this is not what people talked about. Actually, what they claimed that was that seers were seen as politically dangerous because when they visited each other, because seers do, if they visit each other, they fall into trance together, and they also have many people coming to them. So this, because of these activities, they were accused of forming political parties. And this was why it was dangerous to become a seer. I don't know if this is so or not, but this was how they remembered it. And later you will see that there is some truth, a little bit of historical truth in there. In any case, after Saddam's regime fell, seers eventually came back, not right away, it took a few years. So it was in the early 2010s that there was a real renaissance, and this kind of started mushrooming. So there were seers popping up everywhere when I was again doing my field research. It was quite amazing. And again, there could be many different explanations. My two main ones, one is that they had quite a success, social success. So people were really visiting them and talking about them. So they were very much immune, so to speak. And they enjoyed quite a big amount of respect. So it was something that entered people's consciousness. And the other thing, this may be a little cynical, but I think connected with the previous phenomenon, that it was also a financial success because people give money to the seers, especially when they really have them. So you see on your right, two houses, they both belong to two female seers because seers can be either gender. When I first met these women, they were living under very harsh conditions in very poor houses. And in a few years' time, after becoming and starting work as seers, they were able to build huge houses like this. It is exactly this financial success which makes some people, along with modern education and government efforts against such things. So this makes some people suspicious of seers' activity and if they are real, which does not necessarily rule out visiting them. So somebody can be suspicious of seers and still go and see them. So that these things can go together. Altogether, I would say that there is a marked difference between how people of different educational and caste backgrounds perceive seers. Now, educational background doesn't need much explanation. Educated people, especially middle class, tend to reject, not 100%, but tend to reject seers. those so uneducated, illiterate villagers, especially the elderly, still very much respect seers and go to see them. There are differences, of course. However, what was really interesting that I found that when it comes to the traditional religious establishment, the so-called priestly castes, especially the top, those who fulfill some kind of more important function with this traditional religious establishment, they tended to reject seers regardless of their educational background. So even when they were uneducated and illiterate, they were more likely to say that, we don't accept that. And that needs a bit of an explanation. So the caste system, which I mentioned, we use the word caste for the want of a better word. It has nothing to do with purity, like in India, but Yazidi is born into a certain caste and they cannot change that caste. So that's hereditary, and there is no intermarriage between the castes. There are three castes. There are the two priestly castes, the sheikhs and the peers. And then there is a huge caste of followers or commoners, the murids. And anybody who has worked on Islam will recognize that these words come actually from Sufism. Every Yazidi must have a sheikh and a peer. That's also kind of hereditary. They must give respect to their sheikh and peer, as well as financial support is a form of alms. So usually that's money today. And also priestly lineages, which descend from holy beings. So they have holy beings as their ancestors from whom they have inherited what they call sometimes salary. So certain abilities to heal sickness. Each family lineage has a different ability. So some heal, I don't know, headache, another heals some, I don't know, stomachache, and so on. There is this inheritance. And finally, there are the ruhani. So what comes from ruh, soul, the people of the soul. This refers to the so-called, you could say, spiritual leaders. It's usually translated. So these are the top religious leaders. You can see them in the photo. Naturally, these are from the sheikh and peer caste, but not just any sheikh or peer. So these are also kind of inherited within certain lineages. So it's kind of restricted who can become a top spiritual leader. Now, if you compare this to the seers, most seers come from the commoner class, or caste, sorry. I thought about it. I can only recall 3 exceptions who were sheikhs, but they all 3 were females. 2 of them were illiterate, actually. They were either poor or not well off. So altogether, you could say that seers are typically from the lower caste, the commoner caste, or they are economically deprived, or females, or all 3, or a combination of these. So what is the attitude of the priestly caste, especially those who feel a more important function within the priestly caste toward seers? I would say that it's generally one of suspicion and rejection. This doesn't mean that they reject the very idea of direct communication with the Batinî world. They accept it. They just say that it no longer happens. It's a thing of the past. And those who do it today, they are frauds or cheaters. So typically what you see there is inside a shrine, a Yazidi shrine, and those steps lead to a small room inside the mountain, which is dedicated to the jinn. And the guardian of the shrine, who came from a ruhani or spiritual leader family, he told me that liars cannot climb those steps because jinn cannot suffer lies. And then I didn't ask anything. He laughed and added, I have seen many seers fall down those steps. And I looked at him like, what? He said, yeah, because they are mostly frauds. Just let me quote the words of an old lady. She was totally uneducated, as was her son, but her family, she was a peer. They, not a top function, but they had some importance. And this is what she said to me when I asked about seers. There are no seers left. Not like the seers of the past. The good seers of the past are gone. The seers of the past, so the whole world, in the trance, could tell us which shrine to go for healing, who is going to die, who is going to have a child. They are gone. These new ones, they are not worth a thing. I have no belief in them. They are no good. They are like gypsies looking at coffee beans and telling fortune. They lie. By God, they just want money. It is all useless. They are saying, 5,000. My looking is 5,000. What a shame. The seers of my youth did not ask for money. It was your decision what to give, a piece of clothing or a dinar. They did not say, go home and come back on this and this day. Now people have to wait their turn. They all lie by God. They just want to build a big house, buy a car, go to Europe. You have to pay the smugglers. It's $10,000 to $11,000. It is all lies. There are no seers left. So I would say her attitude is very much typical of her social group. My guess is, obviously, they don't voice this or do not realize this, but my guess is that this kind of hostility is based on a rivalry between the two groups. So when you talk about priestly caste, you can talk about routinized charisma, which I already mentioned. So the priests and sheikhs are descend from holy beings, and from them they have inherited their status, also their salaries or ability to heal certain sicknesses. There's Baba Gavan is healing headache. And obviously, both for their position and for healing, they get some financial, so they get money for it in exchange. And as it happens, seers are also able to heal, and they also get money. So you can see there is some rivalry here over basically sustaining yourself. And then there is a question of religious knowledge. So priestly castes are in charge of certain life cycle rituals, which only they can perform. And as such, they should know the prayers which go with such rituals. But typically they don't. It's at an amazing level. And usually they say that, yeah, my parents and grandparents used to know, but somehow we didn't learn it. I'm not really convinced if this is even true, if they used to know it in the past, but they certainly don't do it now. And even the spiritual leaders who are supposed to be experts on religion, quite often their knowledge is pretty shaky, and people are aware of this. So again, I heard it was different in the past. Maybe. But then you get the seers who actually seem to have real charisma because they act as direct living channels between the human and the spiritual or Batinî world. They also have the ability to heal. And finally, they have a kind of knowledge because when they are in trance, they learn things about religion, and some even claim that they were taught. They learned prayers in their trance state, prayers that nobody else knows and which they can then recite to heal people. So knowing prayers is a big thing because 99% of Yazidis don't know any sacred text. So it's something. So as you can see, they have charisma, they have knowledge, which provides them with a social prestige and also with an income. And in this respect, they are in rivalry with the traditional religious establishment. Like I said, those of the traditional religious establishment usually say that, today they are cheaters. Those of the past, so they accept that. But in reality, I think this rivalry is not a new phenomenon. So just looking quickly at historical examples, there was, and this takes us back to Saddam and why people thought he was suspicious of their political activity. So material on Yazidis mention a Kocheks Mirza seer, who lived at the end of the 19th century. And he predicted the end of Islam and the coming of a new era of justice when Yazidis would rule the earth. And he was trying to instigate people to rise. So you can imagine how Ottoman authorities and Muslims generally reacted to that. However, he was not killed by Muslims. He was killed by the Yazidi at the order of the Yazidi prince, because he also taught his followers to send the arms that should go to the prince, to him, which they appear to have done. He got really rich, and that led the prince to have him murdered. This is actually factual, but we also have some legends, or I found some legends about other seers. There you see Kocheks, who lived in the first half of the 20th century. It's not a real photo, it's a drawing, but you can find it in quite a few families these days. And people say that their parents or grandparents remember him. And the story I heard was how he predicted his own death, saying that he will be stung on Friday by 3 bees. And when he said this, he got up, he went to Lalish. And my informant said, when he got to the entrance of the valley, Lalish is a holy valley of the Yazidis. So when he got to the entrance of the valley, he was met by 2 men. They opened fire, they killed him. Yazidis killed him. Why? Because of envy. He had karam, miraculous power. He had great respect among the people. The priestly family had him killed. I don't know exactly why. And then there is Kocheks, the most famous seer of all. He lived a few hundred years ago. He's so famous that even educated people talk about him and compare him to Nostradamus. He is supposed to have performed a lot of miracles and foretold a lot of things which came true. He was also from a poor commoner family, but everybody knows that he still became the Baba Sheikh. The Baba Sheikh is a father of the Sheikh. It's a high religious position. It's usually translated into English as Yezidi Pope, which is not exactly correct, but it shows you his status. And obviously, he can only be a sheikh and only from a certain lineage. But still, Birim became one, and the story, the Baba Sheikh of the time had a dream about some ram and goat fighting, and he wanted to have it interpreted, and people told him to ask for Birim. And when he called out 3 times, by the 3rd time he called out, Birim appeared next to him in Lalish, the holy valley, and sat down next to the Baba Sheikh in his special place. And that's what you see there. So it's in front of the entrance to the most important Yazidi shrine, and only the Baba Sheikh can sit on that jash, the one covered with red. So it's a very strict thing. But still, Birim sat there, and then without being told, he knew about the dream of the Baba Sheikh and interpreted it to mean that the Baba Sheikh was going to die, and he, as the goat, was going to become the new Baba Sheikh. The Baba Sheikh just died, accepted this and died. And then there was a problem because the prince of the time came and said, I do not accept this. No commoner may sit in this place, only a sheikh. He demanded all kinds of rules from Birim. I forget what they were, but the last one was to test the back of the prince. Birim told the prince to lean his back against the wall. The prince did so, and his back was stuck. He could not get away. This was approved. The prince said, this place is lawful to you, congratulations. Back then, the Baba Sheikhs had miraculous power, not like now. So we can say that he was a seer from a commoner family, but he still had a kind of karam or charisma that made him superior to spiritual leaders. One had to die in order to let him become a Baba Sheikh, and the other one was humiliated, so they were inferior to him. So these stories actually, I think, recall that this rivalry is not, and so much about the caste system, but there are some other power tensions which are regardless of the caste system. And I'm talking about women and their lack of agency and acquiring it. And since this is the Middle East, I don't think I have to explain you that women's social position was in traditionally in many ways restricted. This is changing today, but it's a different story. So traditionally, I mention the most important aspect, women married early, usually arranged marriages. Their freedom of movement was restricted, at least before menopause. Young women used to have little or no voice, so they were ruled by male relatives or the mother-in-law, so elderly ladies are something else. They still do not inherit even today. So in this sense, they are worse of the Muslim women. Women who divorced or became widowed and remarried lost and still lose their children to their husband's family, former husband's family. And generally speaking, male children are more welcome when they are born than girls. So these are boys and these are girls. However, and here's the words of the mother of a young seer. She was 15, and the words of her mother are very indicative because she said, after we had learned that she, my daughter, was becoming a seer, I raised my hands in thanks to God. I was so happy, as if I have had a son, as if God had given me a son. So, sons and daughters. But if the daughter is a seer, She becomes like a son. And altogether, these seers are respected and listened to. You can imagine that even a young female seer has a kind of respect and voice that no other woman has. She also has more freedom of movement, but I will not go into that because of lack of time. But what is, I think, is very important is that becoming a seer can mean a way out of marriage. And we are talking here about arranged marriages, which sometimes against the wish of a woman. So theoretically, seers are expected to be celibate. So if one becomes a seer before marriage, then they have to stay single. If it's after marriage, they are supposed to not have marital relations with a spouse. This is the ideal, of course, and I know of exceptions, but people make remarks about that. So it's not how it should be. And what my impression was that sometimes for women, this can be both a physical rebellion against forced marriage, but also sometimes a way out of marital relations. So several times when I was told by female seers that, yes, my husband didn't want me to become a seer and gave all kind of reasons why he didn't want it. And people said, yeah, you know why? Because then he cannot have relations with her. So that's really the real reason. And if they accept for that the woman become a seer, then usually the relations are finished. So it takes years. And I had several examples. I will just refer to one. It was very interesting because I asked her several times how one becomes a seer. And I wanted to know how she knew, what she experienced, how she understood. But each time she returned to the fact that this is what she emphasized, that she didn't want to get married. So she said, I will tell you, when I first got married, I did not let my husband come near me. When I first married, I fell into suffering. I couldn't see. And she went blind. My father's family married me off by force. I didn't want to get married. You know, my sister, when I was a girl, I didn't know I was a seer, but I was always saying, I will not get married. I said I will not marry. I didn't like the idea of marriage. When I married, I did not let my husband enter my room for 2 days. My family said, you should be ashamed. Let him come to your room. They took me to the shrine of Karajar, holy being. They killed a lamb. That evening, I let my husband come to me, and then I fell into suffering. I fell and fell. And I have to add that her story was that her husband had a previous marriage where he couldn't have children, and the doctor said he cannot have children. But after she was married to him, she had a vision where a holy being told her that she was going to have 5 children, and after that, she will receive a gift. She will receive keramet. And this is what happens. So it basically means that you will have 5 children, but after that, you will become a seer. And so she became a seer after 5 kids. So it basically meant that then she stopped having a marital relationship with her husband. And after 5 kids, he accepted it. So these are women, but I have to admit that lack of agency over one's life and actions is not only typical of women. It can happen to men in certain situations. And the most typical one, this is my last one, is that in the army, Iraqi army we are talking about. So you can imagine what it was like. And in my spring lecture, I talked about jinnar, or people working with jinn, and how they create amulets with automatic jinn writing. And I will not go into the details now, but I met 2 men who did this kind of automatic jinn writing. And the interesting thing was that both of them became jinndar. So their symptoms started when they were in the army, and both of them were in the army for years. Actually, one of them was during the Iraq-Iran war, which was a horrible war in every way. And then he was in Kuwait during the 1990 invasion, and he started displaying his symptoms of the jinn communicating with him while they were waiting for the reaction of the bird. So, they got attacked. And that's when, under this kind of pressure, that it started. And of course, both men were promptly let go from the army, which was not easy in the Iraqi army. And then they spent the rest of their life as jinndar, as jinn workers. In conclusion, I would say that Yazidi seers are kind of esoteric outliers in their community, in as much as their position reflects the internal structural tensions and inequalities of the community when it comes to caste, gender, or financial goods or income. They are a part of religious tradition. We know that from the few writings we have. But at the same time, they are outside, or at least on the periphery of the traditional religious establishment. There is a moral ambivalency surrounding their person, so they may be perceived as people with keramet, miraculous power, and esoteric knowledge, which derive from direct connection with the spiritual world, or they may be perceived as frauds, as cheaters. And one does not even necessarily preclude the other. Or, and this is the third possible way of seeing that, and this is the ethic or outside the Western way, is perceiving them as rebels, people who act out against their powerless or oppressed state. And these are not my adjectives. It's used by Luis in his seminal work on ecstatic religion and possession. So they can act out by becoming a seer, which can be so becoming a seer can be interpreted as a way of acquiring agency and a form of spiritual, as a form of spiritual protest against the religious hegemony of the priestly caste and their inherited or routinized charisma. And it can also be seen as a protest against social and gender inequalities within the community. So thank you for your attention.